I was asked to introduce Father General, and I happen to know this next presenter, so I asked to introduce her. But this is the last of me introducing anybody, so just so you know. Thanks, Jack. Okay, if we could, those coming in, take their seats. Great. There is no one better to give us a lens to look through to understand, appreciate, and care for our common home than Mary Evelyn Tucker. She has written extensively in collaboration with others on religion and ecology, most notably co-editing the series of Ecology and Justice from Orbis Books, and created courses in Restoring the Earth Community. She co-created conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard and co-edited the resulting 10 volumes that came from that. Her study of Thomas Berry and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin helped her forge her ecological spirituality. Berry, the geologian, and de Chardin, the spiritual evolutionist, are forerunners to our current desires and programs to know and protect the earth. She has served as vice president of the American Teilhard Association for the last 42 years, until recently stepping down. Of special note is her creative work in the Emmy Award-winning film Journey of the Universe. With an MA from Fordham and a PhD from Columbia, Mary Evelyn teaches now at Yale University at the School of Environment and the Divinity School. And she is co-director of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. Please welcome Mary Evelyn Tucker.
Thank you so much, Bill, and to all the organizers, Francisco and his committee, to Father Sosa for that wonderful talk, and to all of you from various parts of the world. My grandfather, Carlton Hayes, was a European historian at Columbia, and he was the U.S. ambassador to Spain in the Second World War. So Spain is a very special place in our family. My grandmother, also Mary Evelyn, was here, my mother, Mary Elizabeth, and my brother, my uncle, Carol. It was during that time in Barcelona, actually, that my grandfather, with the government of Spain, helped 40,000 refugees come across the Pyrenees and make their way to North Africa. And he and my mother, here at the port in Barcelona, witnessed the exchange of prisoners between the Allies and the Axis. So this is a very, very special city for me. I've been here a number of times, and I congratulate you on holding the conference in this remarkable city. Now, on my father's side, we had a great uncle, William Duane, who was the president of Fordham. And my father went to Holy Cross. I had a brother who went to Georgetown, and another did a master's at Loyola University in LA, and a sister who went to Boston College. So we have a family of Jesuit education. In addition, I did my first Ignatian retreat, actually at Warnersville in Pennsylvania, where many of those retreats began under George Aschenbrenner. When I went to Japan in '73, I did a retreat with Enomia LaSalle, who was an extraordinary Jesuit who was in Hiroshima when the bomb dropped. And he and other Jesuits, as you know, were doing Zen Christian work at that time. And I studied at Sophia University in Tokyo with a number of them. I also came back to Fordham, where I studied with Thomas Berry, who I'll mention in a few moments. But Fordham was a very lively place with a history of religions program with Thomas Berry at that time. Bill Ryan, who started the Center for Concern in DC, held a very important conference on Catholic social teachings up in Guelph. And for my whole youth, Catholic social teachings were extremely important. And thanks to Father Arupe, as was mentioned, that became important for the Jesuits too. I've been blessed to talk at about 12 of the universities in the US, including the last conference for Jesuit alums. Now, As Bill mentioned, the influence of Teilhard de Chardin has been extraordinary in my life, even from high school, where I didn't understand him fully, but when I went to Japan and did various retreats, I began to understand him more. And John Grimm, who is with me here, we led the Teilhard Association for 40 years. The influence of Pope Francis, I think, on all of us is quite extraordinary, isn't it? And I used to say to my mother as a young person, if we have a pope who is beloved and has a message for the environment and justice, we will have a chance for a flourishing future. And I think that is the hope that we have right now with Laudato Si. Now, I want to give background why I think spiritual and moral change is the most important thing for the environment. I was very active in the civil rights movement, went to college in Trinity, which was the women's part of Georgetown. And, you know, in our country, this notion that separate but equal was an accepted policy for African Americans. But when the spiritual and moral force emerged for change, especially with Martin Luther King and others, we knew that was not the case. And so the Civil Rights Act passed in '64. We have a lot of work to do in the US in all kinds of areas, and it breaks my heart where we are in the US right now. So we need help from the Jesuits and many others. But the point here, just as this justice movement went forward with Arupe, we need now a similar spiritual and moral force for the environment. So that's why we did these conferences and books on world religions and ecology for the last 25 years, working with activists and scholars from all over the world to help create a field in education that took the world's religions seriously for a moral force for change. And that force is more and more evident, as in the Glasgow COP, where religious leaders were advocating for climate justice. This series of world religions and ecology was on the Western religions, the Asian religions, that's my specialty, especially China and Japan and Confucianism and Buddhism, and my husband's specialty is indigenous traditions, Native Americans. So this forum on religion and ecology, we started at Harvard, announced it at a United Nations meeting, and we were brought to Yale in 2006 because the environmentalists realized that moral force was missing. And we've been working with the United Nations program for many, many years, but more officially in the last several years. So this field within academia, science and policy are necessary for sure. And I'm at a school for science, the oldest in the US, a 120-year-old school for the environment. So science and policy are necessary, but not sufficient to understand the environment. Eco-spirituality is a valuable new addition, drawing on living Earth systems. And again, that's where the Jesuit community and alums can make a difference. So that this force for change means a protection for the sacred Earth community, resilience with eco-spirituality, and engagement with eco-justice. Just as Father Sosa said, it's being and doing. We need that resilience to make this transition. So the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology is a very large website, about 1,000 pages. There's a newsletter that comes out every month, and we've created 6 courses on Coursera on world religions and ecology that you can take advantage of. So the Jesuit Alumni Global Network, I would suggest, is broadening the context of the sacred to include creation, universe, earth, and human. That's my invitation here today, broadening the context of the sacred to include all of creation. And as Ignatius said, finding God in all things. Care for the whole person means we're part of the community of life. Human-earth relations are critical in this. So we're expanding then social justice to include eco-justice. not just for humans, but for the whole Earth community. So awe and action go together. We need this ecological spirituality, which inspires awe and wonder, and that question earlier, where do we go with youth? This is, I think, one place we can go. That awe and wonder is a basis to sustain the great work of ecological and social justice. Otherwise, we give up, we despair, we're disempowered, we burn out. So the Jesuit Universal Apostolic Preferences, as you all know, what is divine mystery is the first. Who are the oppressed? Where are our youth? How is our common home? Is it healthy? No. But seeing these four as interrelated and discovering how together they can generate change is, I think, the mission of all of us for the next 10 years. Now, I'm putting them again in pairs, showing the way to God. My suggestion is the Ignatian exercises are a treasure, but can we open them up to include a cosmic Christ of the universe, as St. Paul spoke about many, many decades ago? And journeying with youth, can we include the spiritual, not religious, those searching for truth and for engagement, and those trying to overcome despair and disempowerment? We know for youth, this is very, very difficult right now, as Father Sosa said. So walking with the excluded, including indigenous peoples, obviously, from all over the world, and their traditional environmental knowledge, their culture, their wisdom, as the Pope did in the Amazon Synod 2 years ago. So how to elevate these commitments in light of what we're facing as an Earth community, eco-spirituality and eco-justice. Now, the Jesuits have resources, of course, on this, as was mentioned this morning. There's an Office of Jesuit of Justice and Ecology, which is working on environmental justice. Relatively new, but it's doing very good work. Climate change, care for the poor, extractive industry. And Pedro Walpole, who's based in the Philippines, has a marvelous newsletter on eco-justice and doing terrific work. Now, the potential, again, here is enormous, and that's the invitation to encourage 800 Jesuit universities and high schools to contribute to integral ecology. Cry of the earth, cry of the poor, eco-spirituality and eco-justice. Now, a great example in the US is at Loyola in Chicago, where 20,000 students are, the largest in the US of the Jesuit universities. And for the last almost 15 years, Nancy Tuckman, a biologist who I just spoke to on the phone to get the latest on what they're doing, she founded an Institute of Environmental Sustainability. And since 2015, she's been organizing a climate change conference along with Mike Shook, a theologian. And they've done an online book called Healing the Earth, which won an award. They met the Pope through it. But here's the thing. It's not just a conference at Loyola. It's a conference where they invite one scientist and one theologian from all of the other Jesuit universities in the States, which is fantastic. So about 26 of them, I believe. So each year, the seeds are planted into the various Jesuit universities of eco-justice and eco-spirituality. And they're going to have this conference in Boston. So Albert Einstein says, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. And in the conference in Boston, where all the presidents of the universities, the Jesuit will gather, 200 of them, they are going to be asked to commit to the Laudato Si movement and commit to making their campuses green, which is wonderful. So why is Jesuit education so important? Because the spiritual and moral are integrated. Now that sounds obvious to you, but I've been in secular academia my whole life, and believe me, it can be a struggle. because this is absent. So let me give you an example from Yale, where I've been for 18 years. It took until 2 years ago for our School of the Environment, internationally known school, to get eco-justice, to embrace environmental justice. And my alma mater, Trinity, the women's part of Georgetown, for a long time, got it at my 50th reunion in June. Now, why? Because I had suggested to the president that for our class gift, we could help create an environmental justice program at Trinity. That school has gone in a whole other direction to embrace African American women in the Washington, D.C. area. So it is doing already justice work and education work. But the women who had graduated, largely white women like myself, understood that justice has to go to eco-justice now. And they gave a very generous grant, and a foundation came along and gave another $1 million grant for internships for these students. So this is why I'm saying a university that has spiritual and moral values can make the changes that secular academia cannot. You see? Now, fundamentally, the environmental crisis is a spiritual crisis. We were brought to Yale in 2006 because one of the most illustrious environmentalists in the world, Gus Beth, he had founded, I don't even want to go through all his list, but he said in 40 years of doing environmental work, we don't have this moral force. So he says we have the science and policy, the law, economics, and technology to make the transition to a viable future. But we don't have this moral force. Here's an example. We could shift to renewable energy. My nephew works in Silicon Valley in this whole technical field. We have the technical knowledge, he and others say, to make the transition to fossil fuels, which is our greatest challenge right now. We need not just the physical energy, we need the spiritual energy to make that transition, you see? And he and others have calculated, if we shifted the immoral and obscene military budget in the US, even a percentage, we could make this change. There's all kinds of ways that we can make this change, but we need the political will, which means we need moral commitment and spiritual energies to do this. What is missing? As I've suggested, we need the spiritual energies, especially to overcome despair and disempowerment of youth. Despair and disempowerment of youth. There are now ministries at the Yale Divinity School for eco-anxiety and climate anxiety. So the young people who claim very much to be spiritual but not religious, they're searching for a broad search for meaning, purpose, and belonging. How to live life with connection to others, to nature, and to the universe as a whole. Overcoming eco-anxiety is going to be one of our largest challenges. How can we do this? How can we do it with cultivating a sense of joy and peace, sensing the divine in all life, as Ignatius said, belonging to an earth community? This is what youth want. They want to belong. Contributing to a greater good is clearly what they also want. The stress, though, of the climate emergency, and I call it emergency, it's not just climate change. The UK government, many governments have said and voted that it is a climate emergency. The UN say it's a climate emergency. We've got to raise the level of concern because we are at a breaking point. The statistics I hear at the School of the Environment would make us all weep. And I am sleepless at night with this climate emergency. The impact of this emergency, the heat, all over the world, India, China, Europe, the West, in the US. It's heartbreaking. Rising seas, coasts receding, floods, hurricanes, typhoons, agriculture, food security, and the poor being the most affected. We know that. The water shortages are already dire. But if we don't say water is sacred, how are we going to make the changes? How are we going to make the changes? Climate refugees, and my colleague Christine will talk about migration next. This is a picture from the Jesuit website. This is heartbreaking. You know it in Spain. You know it in Greece. You know it all across the country. We know it from our borders. These refugees from Latin America are coming because of climate change. All from Africa, the droughts, etc. How can we then have eco-justice for climate refugees? As was mentioned this morning, assistance for camps, food and medicine, protection for women and children in these camps, education, as Father Sosa said, migration services, resettlement and unemployment. This is going to be one of our greatest challenges, huge challenge. And Europe has done extremely well, I think, and we're so grateful for what you have done, including for the Ukrainian refugees right now. Another heartbreak. Here's what the financial community says, and my brother has been head of Chubb Insurance in New York for decades, and he says, this is a climate emergency. The insurance industries are going to lose their shirts. They already are. You look on Swiss Re, Munich Re websites, they recognize climate change for sure. And this report from Swiss Re says 23 trillion in reduced annual global economic output worldwide will be a result of climate change by 2050. This, Wall Street is saying, is a financial crisis as well, a huge financial crisis. Now, I know you're not feeling exactly hopeful, perhaps at this point, but I want to mention one of the most important things that religious communities are doing, and that is divestment. And the Laudato Si movement has helped this. It was started by Bill McKibben in the US. But just this month, in July, 35 religious institutions have divested from $1.25 million of fossil fuel. In October of last year, before the Glasgow COP conference at the Vatican, 72 religious institutions have divested from $4.2 billion. This is a movement we can get behind, we can make a difference, and the oil companies know that. These statistics are staggering. The total now of divestment is $40 trillion. 1 year ago, it was 14. That growth in 1 year is fantastic. Religious communities are 32% of that total, more than the educational and philanthropic institutions. What an opportunity to make a difference. The Jesuits, again, the invitation is to divest and invest in alternative energies. That is what is needed. And there is a Jesuit committee on investment responsibility. It's true in all the religious orders, and religious orders started corporate social responsibility. Now, ESG, ecology, social, and governance, qualities in corporations. So the order is divesting province by province. The Jesuit universities, several in the US, already have and led the way, including Georgetown. Now, in addition to climate change, the two other major international problems are pollution and biodiversity loss. I'm just going to say a very little bit about them. The pollution, I have traveled all through Asia for 40 plus years. The pollution in these rivers, in India, for example, sacred rivers, every one of them. I was there in 1974, went to the Ganges, etc. You could swim in the Ganges. The rivers, these sacred rivers, are deeply, deeply polluted. And millions of people, 50 million people, depend on the rivers in the Gangetic Plain. What is going to happen there and elsewhere? Because the rivers all over the world are deeply polluted. So this is a major health problem, clearly, of air, of water, of soil, of food. The toxicities in our food are horrendous. I've been a vegetarian for 50 years. When are we going to understand that the food we eat and serve to our children has got to be healthy food? And this affects, this pollution, the poor most especially. In the US, we have a whole area in Louisiana called Cancer Alley from the refineries of the oil treatment plants. And Flint, Michigan, and many other cities have such polluted water that they have to drink bottled water. Now, biodiversity loss, we are in the midst, and I think most people don't understand this, but we are in the midst of a 6th extinction period. On the floor of the Natural History Museum, one of the largest in the world, it says we're in an extinction period, but we have the potential to stem the tide of destruction. How can we lose these species as part of the web of creation? Are these not sacred? It's not a human or animal choice. This is an integrated ecology. Integrated. A 150 species are going extinct a day. How can we absorb this? But just in July, a few days ago, a UN report came out that took years to develop, 4 years, 85 experts, 33 countries. The summary was approved by 139 countries in Bonn on July 7th. It's based on a 2019 report that says 1 million plant and animal species are at risk of extinction. Each day, 150 go extinct. And indigenous knowledge, as we know, is absolutely essential for this. Now, I'm saying this that we can include our embrace of compassion for all life. This is again Ignatius. All of life is sacred. So the response then to the environmental crisis, with the UN identifies as these 3 key crises: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. We need to include them all. And religious leaders and communities are responding. In the last 25 years of this work at Harvard and Yale, but all over the world, religious leaders, community, lay people, academia, and beyond are responding. And Laudato Si, the encyclical of Pope Francis, is most significant as a document and as a movement. A movement. This care for our common home that came out in 2015, I was in China when it came out. I rushed to read it on my way home on the internet and so on. I was weeping as I read it. The power of this document is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. Calling for integral ecology, calling for an eco-spirituality. The last chapter is calling for eco-spirituality. Awe, wonder, and beauty of creation. And of course, eco-justice, cry of the earth, cry of the poor. This broad invitation of the Pope to Catholics around the world, 1 billion, and another 1 billion Christians, huge. Orthodox, Protestant, Pope Francis is good friends with the Patriarch Bartholomew, head of the Greek Orthodox Church, and we went on many symposiums with Bartholomew saying the earth is icon. The earth is a spiritual vessel. And Pope Francis thanks him at the beginning of the encyclical as he thanks other traditions and other religious communities and bishops around the world. People of all religions are invited into this spirit of Laudato Si. Spiritual people and seekers. Now, the response of the world's religions was immediate, positive, and affirming. They have written their own statements. You can see it on our forum website. They wrote statements affirming this, and they've had statements themselves, the world's religions, on the importance of the environment. But they too want to work with the Laudato Si movement, which was just set up 2 years ago at the Vatican. You can see these responses, as I say, on our website. What about the response of environmentalists? Again, back to secular academia. Our former dean, Peter Crane, who was head of the Kew Botanical Gardens, a very eminent botanist, not overtly religious, but he said, Mary Evelyn, John, we have to do a panel on Laudato Si at Yale. And I said, of course. But it was delayed. It didn't come out until June, as you know. He said, doesn't matter. We're going to do it in April. You know how busy a place like Yale is in April when all these things are happening, so many conferences. We had standing room only at the law school for a panel, interdisciplinary panel on Laudato Si. Yale was extremely interested in this encyclical. And after COP in Paris, we had a panel in our school. The first speaker, an eminent lawyer, held it up. And he was skeptical over the summer. He said, well, Mary Evelyn, it doesn't have cap and trade. I said, Dan, just read it. And he held this up, Laudato Si, and he said, this is why we got an agreement in Paris on climate change. And that's what the Pope was aiming for, to help the Paris Agreement. Now, one of the most remarkable things, I think, is Bill McKibben is one of the most illustrious environmentalists in the US, but beyond. He started the divestment movement. He's written many, many books. He came to speak at Yale. 1,000 people showed up. Next morning at breakfast, he says, Laudato Si is the most important document of the 21st century. He's not Catholic. He's an environmentalist who is very spiritual. Think about the potential here. I can give you many other examples. Amitav Ghosh, one of the most eminent writers in India, comes to Yale. He ends his whole talk and his book with Laudato Si. With Laudato Si. Now, Leonardo Boff, eminent liberation theologian from Brazil, in 1997 wrote a very influential book, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. It's part of this Orbis series on ecology and justice that John and I edit, along with Leonardo and Sean McDonough of Ireland. Now, when he was writing this book, Thomas Berry, our teacher from Fordham, said, Leonardo, you cannot liberate people without a healthy environment. Leonardo is quite brilliant. He got that connection, and that's why that book, in 97, is titled Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. A very influential book. Now, I'm going to just cite a few of the chapters from Laudato Si. Human roots of the ecological crisis. The Pope is saying the instrumental use of nature, that nature is dead, is a horrible worldview, and that is the worldview we have so we can exploit it. Consumerism and materialism gone rampant, a culture of waste, and again I take the responsibility of the US, so wasteful, so careless, so consumerist-oriented, horrendous. We fight this all the time. It's so sad. That market-based solutions are going to do the job here, it simply isn't true, because we have this vision of economic progress without limits. We need an eco-economics, which is emerging. Now, chapter 4 on integral ecology, that ecology, economics, and equity are integrated. That the principle of the common good is what we need. Solidarity with the poor and refugees, again, we hold up. And intergenerational justice. This is a term emerging all over. The justice for next generations. The right to a healthy environment. The rights of nature. This is beginning to explode. We can talk about it. The gospel of creation is second chapter, this great promise of the mystery of the universe. I love that phrase. It's very Teilhardian, where the harmony of creation is in each creature, the interdependence of life. It's a universal communion. And here's his phrase: the natural environment is a collective good, the patrimony of humanity. This is our sacred treasure for all future generations. Now, the last chapter is on ecological education and ecological spirituality, where the Pope says a new lifestyle with a web of relationality is needed, a covenant between humans and nature, ecological conversion mentioned by Father Sosa. I love this phrase too, an authentic humanity calling for a new synthesis. This is what the next generation wants, a new synthesis that's functional, that will change things. And again, an invitation, a suggestion is at the base of this is a cosmic and eco-spirituality, an appreciation for the sacred universe out of which Earth and all life has evolved and to which we belong. We belong. Let me just put these pictures up for a moment. You know, the Webb telescope is giving us these extraordinary pictures from space right now. These are meditations for us. The far-reaching galaxies of the early universe, the explosion of stars in the nebula out of which all life, the elements of carbon-based life, emerged from stars. We're descendants from stars. And the size and depth of our universe is certainly a cause for wonder and awe. Trillions of galaxies, which our grandparents didn't know, and their grandparents. This is a new moment, an explosion of joy for divine creation. This is a picture just taken in central Pennsylvania by a friend of the Milky Way. We're part of a galaxy. We could meditate on that all summer long and hardly understand the mystery and beauty here. What does it evoke then? Reverence, respect, responsibility, for sure. Reverence, valuing the complexity of Earth and the profound interdependence of all life systems. The sunrise and an eclipse here. The sunrise. What does that mean? The sunset, this extraordinary balance of interdependence of life and the seasons. Respecting all life means a realization that all life is connected and emerged here on Earth after billions of years of evolution. Nowhere else in our solar system or where Hubble or Webb have gone is there life. How precious this is. We're part of a 14 billion year evolving universe, 4.6 billion years here on Earth, 1 billion years for the first cell, 2 billion years for multicellular life to emerge. What kind of spiritual depth can arise here? Earthrise on Christmas Eve that changed our worldview forever of the specialness of life on this planet. This iconic picture of our blue-green planet, again, is a meditation. You know, Ignatius was a genius about igniting the imagination to connect, to feel part of. This is an icon for our meditation. And all Earth systems arising from the volcanic processes that has created life. So the responsibility then for the future of life, clearly we're responsible for the care and continuity of the Earth community. And believe me, many people, not only scientists, are saying, will life continue? That's the question. Will life continue? We're responsible for the rainforests, the breath of life, the the river systems and the water that they carry, the fish that they carry, the fish and coral reefs in our oceans. The coral reefs, the Great Barrier Reef off Australia is dying. Birds, their beauty, their complexity. The migration of birds is one of the greatest mysteries on our planet. That they can go 6,000 miles from Tierra del Fuego in South America to Canada, have their birds be born and fly all the way back. They know the route, even the fledglings. What does that mean? All that connection then of Earth systems to human systems and to future generations, next generations. That is the continuity of life that we are called to. So the eco-spirituality then of Christianity, we're part of a sacred universe, all of creation, both written scripture and universe scripture. The medieval theologians knew there was revelation in the earth itself. We've lost that. Revelation isn't just our gospel truth. It's, as Ignatius would say, the divine within. So the earth community that all life forms are sacred, from the anthropocentric, human-centered to eco-centered, is the invitation. A communion of subjects is a sacramental spirituality that we have, a great gift to understand the sacredness of all things. And the great work is from dominion or control. As Father Sosa said, this is no longer control. It's stewardship and creation care, and even beyond that, humility to understand we don't even know these ecosystems and how they should be managed. Now, I want to bring into the heart of this conversation one of the greatest resources we have for an eco-spirituality for our times, and that is the Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. An incredible resource. Yes, he's difficult. When I read him in high school, I said, there's something here. I didn't get it. I went to Japan, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's something extraordinary here. So it will take us all time. A scientist and a Jesuit, a stretcher bearer in World War II in the trenches in France, seeing such suffering and destruction that we can't even imagine. But it was there that he got his vision of an evolutionary story, of something emerging in these processes, even of destruction. Deep time, it's now being called. We're part of deep time. His discovery of fossils was part of his mystical work because he could see the layers of life there in Europe as he studied, but also in France, in China, where he lived for many decades, as you know, because he wasn't permitted to teach in France, but he was part of the discovery of Peking man. We've seen his studies, the center in Beijing, and I wept. What did this man understand so far ahead of his time that he could put together evolutionary science and evolutionary spirituality? He traveled all across Asia, and he died in New York, as you know, alone almost, in a very small funeral up at the novitiate on the Hudson. So he has a great deal to offer because he understood that we're living in a divine milieu. What a beautiful phrase. One of his books, the divine milieu, that the universe, as St. Paul says, is infused with the cosmic Christ. And he wove together his science and spirituality. It's a new grounds for eco-spirituality. There's a film being made of his life. Hopefully it will be out next year by Frank and Mary Frost. Extraordinary story. So this evolutionary cosmology, what does it mean? He suggests that spirit and matter are evolving together. Everything has the spirit within, everything, he says. But we emerge from greater lesser to greater complexity and consciousness so that we have self-reflexive consciousness in the human. But all of this expands our sense of awe, wonder, and beauty. The deep reverence for life that we've been speaking of, that humans came out of these vibrant earth systems, that were related to everything that preceded us, and that were reciprocal with them. And this inspires, says Teilhard, a zest for life, the human energy that's needed. Why? Because he wanted to inspire human action. This is what the next generation is concerned about. Why for Teilhard? Because between the two world wars here in Europe, what was the most important philosophy, in France anyway? Existentialism. Existentialism. I was reading existentialism in college too, because I was like, where's the meaning? What do we do? But existentialism, as powerful as it is, Camus, Sartre, incredible writers, it's not enough. And he knew that, because he wanted to inspire human action. Now, at the United Nations, in April of 2005, we had a meeting that was overwhelming to us, because it was the 50th anniversary of Teilhard's death. 1,000 people came to this huge room at the United Nations, 200 from France. The director of the International Monetary Fund, Michel Camdessou, was there. The chair of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. Economists, intellectuals, but also many people from religious communities and academia. Fordham and Georgetown had conferences. It was a celebration such as we have never seen. And we've done many conferences, 40 or 50. So what is it that Teilhard evoked then and now? This notion of a God beyond name and form, which again is so appealing to the next generation. God, he says, must be as vast as the universe and as warm as a human heart, and incomparably more besides. This is all we can say. He had a personal Christ and he had a universal Christ, and constantly trying to see the heartbeat between the two of them. This vital spirit in all reality, he says, deeper than the soul of individuals, vaster than the human group, there is a vital fluid or spirit of all things. There's something absolute that draws us and yet lies hidden. Why the power of the sea, the mountains, the beauty of where Montserrat is, this call of nature to us. Indigenous peoples understood this. We understand it in our sacramental theology, our incarnational reality too. He says the evolutionary lineage, we shall be astonished at the extent and the intimacy of our relationship with the universe. Where are the roots of our being? It's not just our grandparents and their parents and so on. They plunge back and down into the unfathomable past, deep time of which we are a part. And the energies of the earth, he says, in each one of us, through matter is sacred. The whole history of the world is in part reflected. Our soul is indebted to an inheritance worked upon from all sides before ever it came into being by the totality of the energies of the earth. The totality of the energies of the earth have given birth to all of us. Now, there is a book by Lou Savory called The New Spiritual Exercises in the Spirit of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Mightn't this open up the power of the Ignatian exercises to this eco and cosmic spirituality along with eco-justice? Now, another great figure, along with the Pope, along with Teilhard, is Thomas Berry. Probably less known, of course. His first book, Dream of the Earth, The Sacred Universe, published by a secular press, Columbia. the great work, he said, of our time, making this transformation in evening thoughts, these meditations. Now he says, in eco-spirituality, at its core, even our spirituality is earth-derived. The human and the earth are totally implicated, each in the other. If there's no spirituality in earth, then there's no spirituality in ourselves. We're not the only ones who have spiritual consciousness. And we know now more about the communication of trees and forests, of animals and birds than ever before. There's a life force there. The spiritual presence in all life, he says, we can no longer hear. This is the problem of our moment. Hear the voice of the rivers, the mountains, or the sea. The trees and meadows are no longer intimate modes of spiritual presence. The world about us has become an it rather than a thou. A thou, as Martin Buber says. The ecology, then, these are living systems. Our studies in what we call ecology must lead to such intimacy with our natural surroundings. Only intimacy can save us from our present commitment to a plundering industrial economy. As the Pope says, if it's all dead matter, we can extract, we can plunder with no consequence, supposedly. So the sacred quality of earth processes, Thomas Berry says, perhaps a new revelatory experience is taking place, an experience wherein human consciousness awakens to the grandeur and sacred quality of earth process. So here are the key ideas of Thomas Berry. We need a new story of evolution as sacred. We dwell in this sacred universe, and we're living in an earth community. He was a historian of world religions. He went to China in 48, 49 to try and understand the powerful traditions there of Confucianism and Buddhism and so on. He was a remarkable person. 1,000 people came to his memorial in New York, a great, great inspiration. So his phrase, earth is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects, brings us back to the incarnational reality of our tradition. He was a Passionist priest. The logos at the beginning of John's gospel, everything has an inner ordering principle. And this great work of creating a flourishing future is what he was calling us to. Now, out of that, we created a project called Journey of the Universe, which is indebted to Teilhard's experience, his evolutionary perspective, and the new story of Thomas Berry. It's an award-winning film. It's in Spanish. The book from Yale Press is in Spanish. It's published right here in Barcelona in Spanish. It's a multimedia project with conversations and podcasts where I interviewed 10 environmentalists and 10 scientists on the environment. It includes African Americans, Native Americans, saying why this perspective is important. There's 3 courses online with Coursera. We have a website, Journey of the Universe, a newsletter that comes out each month. Now, this is the universe that birthed this, I can tell you. Over 10 years working on this film. We filmed in Samos in Greece 3 times. But the appeal has been quite astonishing. Next generation, youth and students. I have had students in my office, one of whom came in with the book, and he read a line. He was weeping. He said, "Now I know where I belong. I know where I belong." So this has changed consciousness. We've worked in high schools with teachers, in universities, churches, and retreats. There's a curriculum on the website that can easily be used. We've had audiences in China. The last time before the pandemic, we showed it at the Yale Center in Beijing. 77,000 people were watching it. The film has been translated to Chinese, as has the book, and several other European languages, Korean. So what does this mean then about living the story? It's not just a beautiful story out there. It's a story we can live out of. because it orients us to the cosmos, it grounds us in Earth's living systems, it nurtures us with water, air, food, the blessings we say before we eat or drink. It transforms us with energy, this zest or gusto. Gusto, what is that for next generations? So the reciprocity with nature, it is this renewed sense of reciprocity with nature in all of its complexity and remarkable beauty that can help provide the psychic and spiritual energies necessary for the work ahead. The complexity of one flower, of one plant, of one fern, of trees, of these ecosystems are extraordinary. So, as I conclude, eco-spirituality and eco-justice, inspiring awe and action, inspiration for the perspiration of the work, being and doing, education. This is the largest educational network in the world of the Jesuit schools, colleges, and seminaries can take up this work. Leadership for community empowerment, the apostolic work that the Jesuits and others do. Resilience and inspiration. We need both. And I'm going to conclude with the power of art to embody eco-spirituality, and that is the Sagrada Familia right here in Barcelona. And I'm thrilled we'll have a lecture on it and that we'll visit it at the end of this conference. One of the most remarkable sites in the world, a UNESCO site. 30 million people visit it each year. Most visited site in Spain and one of the most visited in Europe. How marvelous we can go there at the end of this conference. The eco-spiritual vision of Gaudí. He adapted the language of nature to structural forms in architecture. He says God is the great architect, but he, Gaudí, was the great genius. The forest in the nave of Sagrada Familia, he felt because humans could feel closest to God in a forest. And how true is that? Even a tree brings out so much in us. So the organic, the biological, the botanical forms inspired his architecture and decoration. He's going into these deep, complex processes of nature. And why? Because as a child, he had rheumatism and couldn't play as other children could. And so he studied nature as a very young child. Here is the forest nave with the trees as the column. What an inspiration to be in their presence. Here are these tree columns that transform us as we walk through it. The sacred geometry, the study of nature that led to the discovery of geometric forms for Gaudí and many others, but he was the first inspiration for many. And this is in the ceiling, the geometric forms on the ceiling. And I have been fortunate to be there before, but this time is going to be very special for all of us. These geometric forms, and that the human, you see, is integrated into nature. Integrated into nature. And finally, in December of 2021, the Spire of the Virgin was finished. And in the spirit of the Mass last night, of Santa Maria del Mar, and the invocation of the feminine spirit of Mother Earth itself, I would like us to clap for Gaudí, for his vision of eco-spirituality, and for the vision we may create of an eco-spirituality for the future of our planet. To Gaudí.
And why don't we clap for Mary Evelyn? Thank you for your presentation. Unfortunately, we have no time for questions now, but you will be around. So please, if you have questions and comments during lunch hour or the next couple of days, please be sure to ask. Our next presentation is just in a moment, so if you need to stand and stretch, terrific, but please don't leave the room. Thank you.